Welcome back to Chasing the Narrative. I'm Colin. This is my show where I talk about whatever stories I want to talk about because it's not your show, it's my show. Simple enough. And today I want to introduce you guys to my really good friend, Michael. You might know him for many different things. He is one of the best Necron players in the world for Warhammer 40K. That's well documented. He ran the High Lords of Terra podcast. He was the first tech helper ever at Charity Hammer that made it actually possible. He has an amazing beard. There's lots of things about Michael that are worth talking about. None of those are what I want to talk about today, because what I want to learn about is this thing that Michael made. While the rest of us were complaining about rules in whatever game we play being bad, Michael went out and made us a game to play. And I feel like that's really neat. And also, I was thinking about this yesterday. I really liked when Mr. Rogers would go to a place and see how that place functions. I thought, forget these stupid puppets, Mr. Rogers. Go tell me more about how the postal system works. And that might seem lame, but the reality is that how it's made is a really fun concept. So before we get into that, let me introduce you guys to Michael Timpe, just so we're clear, because the internet does not know that, Michael. That it's Timpe.
That's true.
Yes, I remember it as timpani. That's how I remember it. The big drums. Yes, yeah. That's how I remember it. All right. So, you are a longtime wargamer.
I am.
Okay. How long ago did you start playing miniatures war games?
It was in high school, and okay. I like you am old, right. So that was many.
In the year of our Lord. Yes, that's right. It was. Yeah. Were there a bunch of nines in the year?
Yes, many nines.
Were there many nines in the year?
There were.
Okay. Because there a lot of things happened in a year that had 3 nines, which all the young people have never experienced.
That's true.
That is true. 3 nines. So you're a longtime war gamer, but you also play D&D and stuff, right?
Yeah, I did role playing even in middle school, so that was great.
Okay, and then have you done writing a long time? Because I know that writing is part of this story as well.
Yeah, so I've been writing for around the same time as middle school. I gave myself without going into too much detail, I wrote a bunch of short stories, and I worked my way up to a few novels, and I still haven't written anything I want to publish, but I feel like I'm getting better at it. So
I did a bunch of writing when I was younger, and I thought the hardest thing about it is that everyone else liked what I wrote better than I did. And so I didn't want to release the thing that I made because I didn't like it, but other people did like it. And then it's just like, well, you don't know anything. You're dumb and I'm smart. So I'm not going to release them. Okay. So Outward Realms is the game that we're talking about. And it is I'm going to give my explanation of it, and then we'll we'll go into it. Outward Realms is a miniature war game like Warhammer 40K, like War Machine, like Star Wars. It's a tabletop miniature game where you collect the miniatures. It's a very different scale than the games that I just mentioned. It's on a 4x4 table. It uses a mechanic called alternating activations, where my things and your things alternate each battle round. And it has an incredible amount of strategy and beautiful models, and a kind of silly amount of lore has been created. And all of this happened kind of without me knowing. And this is significant because Michael and I talk semi-regularly, especially when you were chasing Necrons. When you were trying to get best Necron, we talked all the time about 40K, and that, despite the fact that was before COVID, that was only like a little over 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So somehow between that and now, you have created this massive thing. So how did this start? How did you start making this? How did you come up with the idea? I'm going to make a game. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I was, I think I was in early high school, and I was enamored with this new miniatures thing that I had never seen before. I had played Legos with my friends, and we made up our own rules.
Ooh, now I did that too.
The core mechanic I was missing was dice for conflict resolution.
Oh yeah, me too.
Yeah. So I would say they were very kinetic, very energetic games with high narrative and low crunch.
I made a Deep Space Nine role-playing game out of Legos and graph paper.
Ooh, that's amazing.
I made a space station set, really, because it was all flat and spread out. Yeah. It wasn't. I didn't make the whole 3D thing. But anyways, back to you. As
Yeah,
much
no,
as
no,
I now basically just want to talk about our Lego role-playing games from when we were a teenager, and this is the
That's
problem with
right.
chasing the narrative, because now I'm like, well, that sounds more
What
entertaining
do
than
you
learning.
mean problem? That's
Yeah,
amazing.
right. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
You call it a bug. I think it's a feature.
I also have a bunch of pictures saved on my computer of scenes from Les Mis that I recreated with Legos because I was not a normal kid.
Hey, nor was I.
Exactly right. All right, so
But
you
I
made
knew
that
there was
the game and with Legos.
I knew there was something in there because even then there were like, some systems and controls, like certain colors had higher value.
Right.
So there was something happening, but I didn't really understand, like that was a piece of it. And then I was writing these stories, and then I was making my own role playing setting, and I ran that for years, and all this stuff kind of happened, but none of it came to fruition until the models. When I got to play like Rogue Trader,
Okay.
pre-third edition.
Should we explain to the young folks what Rogue Trader is?
Yeah, I can do that succinctly. Okay. So Rogue Trader predated what we would call kind of modern 40K, the 40K you're used to. It was a very interesting blend of what you would consider 40K in terms of lore and terminology, but combined with a like a D&D style character building, story driven, narrative driven setting. So
and it's the original product, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, actually, technically, Games Workshop was importing and reselling D&D modules, so their head was there, right?
Okay. Space Hulk came out after?
Yeah, I don't know the exact chronology.
Because Space Hulk might be before Rogue Trader, but I don't know that.
I don't know
as a note, Rogue Trader is actually older than the vast majority of the people on the Best in Tabletop Network. There's only a few of us. There's only a few of us that can hang with that comparison.
Yeah.
So,
and I'll be honest,
certainly not Anthony and all the group that are younger than him.
No, not young violence.
Not young violence. A little bottle of young violence.
That's right.
Shake it up, point it at who you need dealt with.
I prefer conversation and conflict resolution for that.
It's not young. When he was especially young, he said no.
No, that wasn't his deal.
Exactly.
He had different approach. I got to play that, and I'll be honest, I thought it was too rules heavy. I thought it was pretty clunky. I wasn't having a great time. Oh, sure, but I mean, like, this was very, like, okay, you can only turn a certain radius with tracked vehicles on this kind of terrain. Like, okay, very simulationist. And I wasn't digging that. I wasn't having a super great time, but I knew that models with rules on a table was something that compelled me. So when third edition came out and the new Tau came out,
a mere 20 years ago,
sure, I was reapproached, and they said, "Hey, there's a brand new army. They have cool new models, and it's a different game than what you're playing." And I played third edition, and I bought this new Tau army, and I was immediately hooked.
Okay.
And then someone was like, "Hey, Necrons," and I was like, "What's a Necron?"
Have you seen the Terminator?
Yes, they educated me. And I said, "Oh boy, these fish people are cool and all, but these Cthulian robots are more my speed." So,
as I describe it, IP theft was much easier in the 90s.
True, that's true. Chaos androids.
Now, did you play Warhammer all the way through to now?
I did.
Oh my god, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
I have played a tournament in every edition of Warhammer.
Ooh, not second.
Well, sure, but I mean, like, third from above. Yeah. Third and above.
Neat.
At least one. I will say, I think in sixth, I literally played one, but I did do one.
What other games did you play along that journey? Out of curiosity.
Oh man! Aside from, I'm going to skip all the board games and all the role playing games because there's so many.
I'm just thinking tabletop.
Yeah, for sure. But specifically, I did War Machine Mark 1.
Okay.
That was pretty influential. I did the original Flames of War because I liked the Italian little tanks and stuff.
Yeah, that had really cool models. Yeah.
Yeah, those are the big ones that come to mind. I know I played other little indie games.
You're also really enjoying Marvel right now.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, Marvel Crisis Protocol. Yeah, that's a really fun little game. By the
really excellent game
that's War Machine.
Exactly, and a game that's going to get a lot more coverage on this network.
Ooh, spicy.
But not right now. Okay, so where does the Outward Realms story start from this?
Yeah, so I wrote this novel. It's the first novel I wrote, and it had the setting, the science fiction setting that I
Oh,
would say is like 40% of what Outward Realms is.
okay.
And the novel was a first novel. It was like, did not knock it out of the park, wasn't that great. And so it went into the trunk and got ignored. Well, 4 years ago, I'm like, man, I really want to make a miniatures game. This is the right time of my life to do it. I have the time and energy to dedicate to this. And then one of the very first decisions I made was, am I going to license an IP or am I going to use something that I made?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you license something, you get some name recognition sometimes, right?
Right.
It could be a way to bootstrap your way into an audience.
Sure, sure.
But then I looked at it and it wasn't actually a cost thing. It was I have this setting. And I'm like, wait a minute, I have a setting. I wrote a book. So I went back to it and I looked at it and I said, about 40% of this will work, but it needs more. And then I went ahead and I bolted on the pieces that I needed to make what you see now.
Okay.
Yeah, that started. That gave me a setting. And
So
then
you
I'm
had a
like,
setting,
okay,
and you're
I
like,
can
I'm
tell
going
a
to make a game.
story with this. Yeah, I can make a game now. I started with a setting though. I had to have a setting, otherwise I had no idea like what kind of game I'm trying to make or what kind of models would be interesting.
Oh,
Why is the
interesting.
conflict interesting? Yeah, it started with that.
So you didn't do any thought about mechanics before
Zero.
that's fascinating because I would have to do the mechanics. I'd have to because of the way it
Mm.
works. I would have to decide first on what kind of game do I want to make, and then how does it fit into its setting. And
Oh,
and
interesting.
so that would have been immediately how I approached it. I helped some friends make
Huh.
video games 20 years ago or something, and I was always like, forget the setting. I need to understand how the widgets move.
Mm.
So interesting that we'd approach that so differently.
Yeah,
So
I
you had
had
the
the
setting,
setting. Yeah.
and
And then
and
once I had a setting, I'm like, okay, now,
but
what
hold
am I
on, I have a
looking for?
question about this.
Yeah.
When you at this point, are you thinking I'm just going to make a game and it's going to be neat, or are you already thinking 4 years ago with the setting, I'm going to make a thing, I'm going to produce it, I'm going to sell it, and it's going to take off? Like,
That second one.
okay, cool.
Yeah, I was going to be completely hands-on.
Okay.
Um, I I could not relinquish creative control. I'm like, especially if it's going to be my thing, right? It has like I like film. I like directors.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of singular vision. I know that a
Mm-hmm.
film requires many creative visions and inputs and work to generate, and that it's an alchemy,
Mm-hmm.
but without like an iron, you know, point keeping things focused, I think that, thing it's easier for something to slip up in a creative endeavor.
You
And
just
this
gave
is a collaborative creative endeavor. To be clear, it takes many people to do this.
for sure. What I love is that you just gave me a Mitch answer. And a Mitch answer is where you ask a question and you get an answer to a different question, but it's incredibly interesting. So that's what's happened. But what I was actually trying to dive into a little bit is, and this is something that you and I don't immediately think of. Most people, if they wanted to make a game, would consider making a game to play with three of their friends, and that would be the end of the project.
Mm, mm.
But you're not doing that, much like how I'm not making one more podcast.
Right.
So your personality is like, okay, I have something to. Did you feel like you had something to add to the tabletop
Oh
gaming
yeah,
world that was not already there?
absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing really doing what we're doing.
Okay.
And
Can,
the
in
specific
in what way? Yeah.
okay, yeah, the specific goals being I had three things spray painted on the wall, metaphorically,
Okay.
that were immutable, and it had to be easy to learn, hard to master, which is a stupid sentence that many makers use, but I actually like really tried to live to that. It
Mm-hmm.
had to play in 2 hours or less
Mm-hmm.
because I'm a busy. I don't know about you, but I'm a busy adult with not a ton of time
Yeah.
to throw out infinite numbers of games. And if doing 160 Necron games in 1 year taught me anything, it's that I could play a lot more of a faster game.
Yes.
And the it had to be on a 4x4 table. And
Okay.
I know that's kind of an interesting point, but I really was trying to be considerate of the amount of terrain and space in the most people's homes possible.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
most people can summon up a 4x4 surface, and that was an important consideration to me.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting that in parallel to you making this, the Marvel Crisis Protocol guys had the same three things,
Yeah,
right? They also were like, you know, it has to play quick and it has to be
yep,
easy. Like they had this, they must have had this. Well, we don't know that they are not here to speak for themselves, but I think that both of your games appeal to me because of that, because of the I don't want to play a 4 hour game of 40K on a 6 foot by 4 foot table all the time.
right.
Right. I know it's 3 hours at a tournament, but it's never 3 hours when Chuck and I are going to play.
No,
Not even one time. So I appreciate the decision early to be like, this has to be played quickly, right? This has
yeah,
to play quickly. So you had these
absolutely.
three darlings. I mean, you had these three commandments, the commandments of Michael.
Mission
Uh,
statements.
yes, from the book of Michael.
Yeah,
From the book of Michael, right?
yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a joke
The
there.
literal book.
And it's a literal book. It actually
I
exists.
know,
No,
I know.
you don't want anyone to read it because it's not good, you said. But it does exist. I would offer to read it, but we both know that I won't. We
Fair.
just we just
You
know
don't
that
read books that you want to read. Why would
it's
you?
true. I can't get my brain to calm down long enough to read a book I'm excited about.
Right.
Reading the book that my friend said, I wrote this thing, it's not good. It's actually not. Yeah. Oh, it's not, is it? There was okay, I'm not going to tell that story right now. Let's get back to you. All right, so you have the game concept, you have your rules, your commandments of Michael.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Then we need, so when you have a 4x4 table, and I knew what I'd be able to make, and I'll actually talk a little bit about that. But
Cool.
so 4 years ago, I built the thing I've been telling people is I spent 4 years planning for the next three. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very true. I spent 4 years preparing the mechanics for what I thought the total game would look like at the end of the run. Right? I didn't start with like, oh, let's try to build something and then bolt it on. I
Mm-hmm.
built a game that was cohesive and complete. That is basically, it turned out to be what got released was one half of that.
Okay.
Right? And so I split up the extra, 50% into two expansions. But the whole game, top to bottom, was built whole cloth
Okay.
and tested for 15 months and really dialed in. And then the realities of manufacturing caught up to me, and the realities of what I can actually accomplish as a single human being with no industry like support or help. Like, what can I actually accomplish? And I said, okay, I can get this done. So
Right.
let's get this done and then keep going.
I would actually like to take this in two different chunks. I would like to
Yeah.
kind of talk first about rules and mechanics
Yeah.
and story, like kind of the part where Michael's at a computer writing, right? I want
Yes.
to talk about that first, and then let's talk about, because I think that our audience will want to hear specifically about how the miniatures were designed and made. I think
Yeah.
that part will be appealing. So let's cover the rules first. So before
Yeah.
you made any models, did you have at least a draft of the full rule set?
Yes, I did. Because
Okay.
we were proxying with like wooden bases that
Sure.
Tony from Hammerhead made for me.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
You're gonna keep them forever?
I have a bag of them somewhere. And they actually have the names written on them and stickers and stuff. It's pretty funny.
Oh, that's great. So you actively were saying, let's make the game and then we'll make the miniatures.
Miniatures came last.
Okay. All right. So talk about making rules talk about writing a war game from scratch, because most people would not be able to do that.
Well, thank you. It started by reading.
It's the beard, everybody knows, but
Oh, it's true. It gives a lot of power
yeah.
when it's not busy eating your soup. So I read probably 30 miniatures game systems first.
Okay.
I went on Drive Through RPG. I spent $300, $400, and I just bought tons of minis games, and I was like tearing through them, just reading filling my head with mechanics and ideas. right?
Okay.
Getting a feel, and I played a few of them, and I was really just trying to like immerse myself in that space,
Mm-hmm.
which is what I do when I'm trying to do something like a bigger in aggregate thing. There was a ton of books that were recommended by people that I trust in game design, stuff by like Richard Garfield, who made a thing that people may have played. Um, and I read some of those, and there were like great ideas about thinking at a macro scale in design that was very helpful, and how to stay focused and refine your ideas into achievable results, right?
Okay.
So I had this books, I had so tons of reading. I did a bunch of homework, like 2 months of homework, 3 months of homework. And then I said, okay, I have this idea. I'm on a 4x4 table. I know about how many models I can have on a table to play the game that I'm looking to play. An alternating activation. I've been calling it platoon sized, not
Mm,
skirmish,
right.
but not a 40K.
Right. In
Somewhere
between.
in between,
Okay.
right? Platoon is in between that. Platoon feels right. And so I said I can get a platoon set of models on here, and then I can build that out. And then something they talk about in that design is, since mechanics can't really be trademarked, that's why you see the same mechanics all over the place, right?
Okay.
Like when you turn a card to indicate that it's been used,
Yeah.
we say tap because
Right.
that's the verb.
Right.
They can't call it tapping,
Right.
but that's what we're doing.
Yeah. They
We're
usually call it
indicating,
activating.
right?
Yeah.
We're indicating on the board that the card has been utilized to
Yes.
our opponent and to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that I could take these mechanics, these big core chunks, and apply them. I knew it had to be alternating activation. That anything else was a non-starter.
Okay.
It solves
Why is
so
that?
many. It solves so many problems from the get-go. Problems that it can solve. It solves alpha strike.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty hard to alpha strike down an entire opponent's army with one unit's one activation.
Right.
If you do it right.
And that thing's also forward now.
Sure. Oh, and it's also utilized some of its capability to act.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So there's an economy built into that. And they talk a lot about, I won't go into the weeds about this, but what you're building when you build a game is you are building a set of economies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a span of them, right? A span of economies. And the thing I keep in my head is the various economies of the game. And I
Mm-hmm.
go, okay, what are these economies? What are their relative and like what's their perceived value, their relative value, and their actual value, right? Because those are not the same thing.
Right.
You can go on any Reddit board about 40K and you can have a very quick understanding that people don't have a really great grasp of relative versus actual value, and that's fine. They shouldn't necessarily.
Just to help our audience, a great example of this is a list that when a codex comes out, everyone flips out about, and then it goes to the table and it's not good. For if you play Warhammer 40K, like when the Orc Codex came out in 8th edition, everyone said that the tractor cannons are beyond broken and they're a huge problem, and if you take 18 of them and blah 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 blah. But it turns out that the Smash-A-Guns were better.
Yes, they were.
Right. And that wasn't because of how hard the math was. People just didn't do it correctly.
Yeah. And to be fair to them, though, at that time, the relative value against things like Eldar Flyers with an auto-hitting weapon that messes up Flyers felt good.
True.
But again, in reality, it didn't quite play out.
Right. You have to put everything on the table.
Right. Well, you do, and that's what that playtesting, that 15 months was all about.
Right.
But learning those economies and setting immutability. So immutability meaning it can't change. And one of the things that will not change in Outward Realms 1.0, period, is it will be 10 activations per side for 3 rounds.
Okay.
It's a fixed economy. There will be 30 activations in a game of Outward Realms. So I know the actual value of those, right? That's unchangeable.
Right.
How much can you get per activation? There's how much I give you as the game designer, and everything else is what you do with it.
Okay.
I can't make you a great player at the game, but I can set a actual value for everything, and then you can perceive whatever you want from it, right?
So when you're deciding on things like what a weapon's going to do and what point value or what cost a unit has,
Yeah.
Did you do a large amount of math modeling on that, or was more from the playtest data? Because I know that some people like to take a new codex from whatever game they play, and they like to make really intricate spreadsheets to figure out which weapons are more efficient and what weapon are you getting a better point efficiency. And I'm curious if that's a good place to start with design, or if it was more about actually seeing the stuff play.
It's a combination. And I know that's a lazy answer,
No,
but
it's
I
probably
did do
correct.
math. Well, I did do math modeling, and I consider that a point, a percentage of it.
Hmm.
But there are things you can't model for
Right.
in a math thing. I mean, you could, but I mean, I'm not going to do them. It's tons of work. I'd have to build algorithms. I mean, come on. So, and the things I'm talking about are you can't model for terrain, you can't model for skill level, you can't model for how much space on the board a set of models takes up because there is an economy of having a base on the board is area denial to your opponent,
Hmm.
which I know sounds super weird. A lot of people are gonna be like, wait, what? Horde armies, part of their, if I was building a horde army, part of its economy would be this physically denies the opponent a particular amount of space on the board to go to.
And your horde army is actually swarms on big bases from a lot of it.
Correct. And that was part of that building, right? I couldn't do lots of models, so I did bigger area
Right.
to sort of simulate the same thing, right?
And it's also easier to play with.
That's all that nice consequence, but it was actually a manufacturing
Well,
decision.
sure, sure.
Yeah.
All right, so you've gone through all the playtesting. Uh, how much did the rules change? So the core,
Oh
let's
man.
the core rules, like
Right.
not tweaks here and there, but like the actual core mechanics of how the game is played. Did you really have them from the start, you think?
I if you look at 1.0, which is what launched on Kickstarter, and compare it to point 19, which is what's up now, I think that if you exclude the army specific rules
Right, which you added.
and you look at that stuff and you take it in, I would say that like 80% of the game is identical.
Okay.
And
All
that's
right.
a pretty good signal to noise ratio.
Yeah. I know that when I played it the first time, which would be early 2020, I think, mid 2020, something like that, you came up and we played. I can't remember when in
Yeah.
2020 that was. But the game I played and then the game I played when the release was ready felt the same to me. Like
Oh, good.
I noticed nuance, right? I was like, huh, I don't remember this being exactly this way, but like
Yeah.
but it felt like it was the same game, which I was impressed by, right? Like you were getting all of this data. It's hard, especially when you're getting feedback from human beings. It's hard to decide if the feedback is true. So
Yeah.
I asked someone for feedback on Fight Club the other day,
Yeah.
and they gave me their feedback. And I thought, and at first it sounded negative, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I realized that their personal persona was skewing the one part of it that I thought was negative. And if I consider that, there's a lot of data in there I can use to help Fight Club be a better show.
Mm-hmm.
But first, I had to think really hard about who was giving me the information and where they were coming from. So
Yeah.
I'm curious how you decided who to listen to from playtesters from when I got salty in our second game we ever played. like how did you decide?
So I built the playtesting. There's 4 playtest teams, and I
Okay.
use an A/B model.
Okay.
Not every playtester group gets the same rules.
Okay.
I'm usually half of them are doing one thing and half of them are doing something adjacent, right? So that I can get, because as you might imagine, I have a very limited number of playtesters.
Yeah.
I, I mean, I'm asking these people to play this game that's relatively new for free, et cetera, et cetera. Their time is valuable. So I really hyper focus them into and have them drill into areas that I think are interesting. And I have them do matrices where they'll like, I need these 2 tested, I need these 2 tested, just 1 or 2 games. I mean, show me what's going on. The the thing I've noticed for this is what you were like, I would almost say a negativity bias with what you were saying. I have to be mindful of the individual like I have faction champions, right? I have one for every faction, at least one, right?
Okay.
When the faction champion comes to me and is like, this is weak, or this is, this isn't working for me, et cetera, I have to temper that
Hmm.
because I know they play one faction. I know they
Hmm.
love that one faction. I know that any perceived reduction in their capabilities is like a personal attack on them, right?
Hmm.
Because they love it. They want it to be good. They want it to be the best. Who doesn't?
I always think of the Rocco P paper fine signed scissors.
There we go. Yeah, but I just have to be very careful.
Yeah.
I just have to be very careful. So I'm very careful
Also,
with those.
also though, when you ask people for feedback, people are much more likely to give you negatives than positives.
True. That's true.
People at their core believe that criticism is more helpful than positivity.
Mm,
And I try to ask people for both because, especially while we were making shows, I want to know what you actually like so we don't lose that while we're trying to fix what you don't like.
yeah, that makes sense. That's good. I like that.
And so I tried when we played to point out the things that I thought were great as well. But I
Yeah,
know that's weird that people don't do that. So I would imagine that most of
yeah,
the feedback you got from testing was very much like, here's the 7 things I don't like, rather than you made this really great thing. I love all this. Here's the things I would change. Would be my guess. I don't know. I'm
yeah.
afraid that.
You're right, but I do ask for one piece of information that's outside of that scope, and it usually gives me some fun insight. I ask them to tell me what the most interesting or fun thing to happen in a playtest game was.
Okay.
And I don't care if it's something I already know about, whatever. I want to hear about I want to hear about the thing they're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's cool.
The bonkers thing, right? And that is interesting. The Where there's like a black swan event in a game, right? To use another kind of
Right.
technical term. I want to hear about the black swan event. I want to hear about the thing that was unlikely but like totally happened anyway and like had this big impact and everyone's going, "Whoa." That's very interesting to me.
When related to that, when I used to interview salespeople for a living, I would ask them to think of a piece of technology that they had purchased in the past few years.
Mhm.
And then I wanted them to tell me, not sell me, tell me why they liked that piece of technology so much and why they were excited about it.
Hmm, that's
And
great.
the idea was a couple things. One is that to sell technology, you need to be able to talk passionately about excitement over technology. But the other
Sure.
thing, but the other thing that I wanted them to do is I wanted them to stop thinking it's an interview and just talk to me. Right?
Mm,
Just share with me something from your life so I can see what your passion looks like.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's what that question makes me think of, right?
Yeah,
I want to ask, I want people to share passion with me. I don't just want to get them to give me information, right?
yeah, that's great.
Okay, we should talk about models because the models are exciting.
Thank you. Yeah.
So what was okay, so I'm Michael Timpe,
Yes.
and
Really?
I have this game, and I have wooden chalk pucks that Hammerhead Games has made for me.
Yes.
But it's likely that people are going to want miniatures.
You know what? In a minis game, traditionally, yes.
Yes. So what happened from there?
So I went to a bunch of concept artists, one of which is named Alex Chen, who ended up doing a bunch of the 2D final art that ended up on the cards and in some, and the cover of the book.
Okay.
And he can't do any more work for me because he got hired by this company called Marvel, which is, I mean, I'm a little bit sad.
Yeah,
I would love to get more work.
that's
No, he
funny.
did a fantastic job, and he absolutely deserves that career path and accolades. But I went to them and I said, and we started. It was one faction at a time, and we built this thing called a design Bible, which
Okay.
where you pick. I won't go too much into the weeds about this, but if you're building something, you build a visual guide for it so that you can build more in the future that feels the same.
Okay.
So like certain
It's like a
geometries,
style.
it's a style guide, but visual style guide. Yeah.
Okay.
And so we have that, and like these are core geometries that we want to like replicate. Anytime you see this type of shape or this pattern of shapes, it should tell you intrinsically it's this faction.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Like if you,
That's something my brain doesn't do. I'm very bad at that. Stephanie
mm,
can look at new 40K models and know where they're from, what faction they're
yeah,
from, much faster than me, even though I know the game much better, because that
mm,
isn't the way my brain associates. So I'm really interested in that. What kinds of things are they like? How do you know what a Batra thing looks like? What's an
yeah,
example of a geometrical rule for the Batra are the space toads that I like the most?
yes, hexagons. You'll see hexagon geometry on their models,
Okay.
and we don't use hexagons really anywhere else. We
Okay.
stay away from them because it's their thing.
Okay.
Um, the rubberized looking material that you see in like a Space Marine's like joint, we
Mm-hmm.
have a sort of rubberized material kind of all over them, like sort of a rubberized suit, and
Mm-hmm.
they have a lot of that motif. You could argue that the augment soldiers sort of have something a little bit similar, but theirs is much actually intentionally much more ovals and more height built into them to sort of stay away from that, right?
Fascinating. Okay.
Also,
So
they have a frog head. That's a good giveaway too. Like
right.
anytime you see a frog face, it's Batra.
Well, but there's also vehicles and stuff. But yes.
Sure, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
So you make this three-dimensional style guide, visual
Yeah,
style guide, and then what
yeah.
happens?
We go to the concept artist, we build the style guide, and we start sketching things out.
Okay.
And then I look at those sketches and I incorporate the lore that I want into them. Like, I think it needs to be blank, or I would like it to be this because in the rules, which we've already made, it has this.
Right.
So put a thing here to help. These guys need a knife because they have a knife, right? That
Man,
kind of
that
thing.
must have been so exciting to see the first concept art come in.
Oh man, it was huge.
Yeah, it must have blown your mind. Like you made this whole world, this whole universe. It's in your
Yeah,
head, right? Which means
yeah,
that you have preconceived conceptions of what things look like.
yeah. True, true.
And then people who are professional artists are trying to bring that to life for you. That just incredible. I think I actually think about that when novels are turned into movies. That
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
I know people always complain, oh, it's not as good as the book. Sure, but what I like to think about is what was it like for the author for that movie to be made? Like
sure. Oh yeah,
like Robert Jordan isn't alive anymore, but if he had been, what would he have thought of the first season of Wheel of Time?
that's a
It's certainly
yeah.
in scale and scope not anything he would have ever experienced, right?
No, true. It's huge. Yeah.
Right. So, okay, so concept art's coming in, they're drawing
Yep.
things.
Yep.
Prototyping is next?
So the next thing you do is you get these 2D models, and they're called the thing you specifically most 3D artists want is it called an orthographic,
Okay.
which means it's the model drawn from multiple angles,
Okay.
which they then take, and then you bring in your 3D artists, and the 3D artists take those 2D orthographics and they build you 3D models, and then this is a really weird workflow because while they're building it, you have two other people involved. You have your technical artist, who is a person who is to take the 3D models and make sure that there are no like flaws in the models that will cause problems.
Hmm.
At the same time, your manufacturer is with you too. If you are really wanting this to go smoothly, you do this part too. Your manufacturer is in there looking for ways to make sure there are not going to be hiccups during manufacturing.
Hmm.
So all together, you build out this thing, and what you end up with is with 3D models that are cohesive meshes. They're clean models, and they've been cut up, chopped up, parted out, built onto sprues, whatever you have to do, so that your manufacturer can take that and then go do their thing.
Right. And you had to make a decision on what material you wanted to make them out of.
I sure did.
Would you like to
Yeah,
share that story so
sure.
people can understand? Because I know that it's popular to trash resin.
Oh man, is it ever?
Yeah. So why don't you talk about picking a material for the models?
Yeah. So you have essentially in modern miniatures gaming, you have four choices,
Okay.
right? And I'm going to talk about the choice that's not a choice, and that's
Okay.
metal.
All right.
Metal models are low detail and they're expensive to make because the material is expensive making it. They're
Because it's metal.
heavy to ship
Mm-hmm.
and they chip easily, they fall over, they dent. They're kind of hard to chop up and work with. They're not just overall, it's not the most awesome experience with metal models.
Mm-hmm.
It is the one of the cheapest ways to get models made. Tons of expertise, decades and decades of expertise is available on it, right? Like I
From
could have,
people that whose expertise is not needed anymore.
well, it's interesting because a lot of them made that transition, right? They're able
Yeah.
to grow their evolution. But you're right, that is an old skill set, and still
Right.
people still make metal models.
Mm-hmm.
Privateer Press does, and I want to caveat this as well. Everything, this is made in the USA, right? So I can't go to China, and I'll talk about that a little bit with plastics, but China's not open to me. So take that off the table. I lose that entire supply chain. I lose that entire logistics chain. Just not going to be a thing.
Okay.
So I'm limited to US manufacturing of this very specific niche product. So metal's out, right? I could have gotten it made, would have been cheap, tons of downside. Boy, that would have felt weird. Hey, check out my modern game made of metal models.
Right.
No. So the second thing was PVC plastic. And you see a
Okay.
ton of these models come out now. Often made overseas. What I mean by PVC is if anyone has ever seen those white pipes that get buried in your front yard for powering sprinkler systems or feeding them water,
Mm-hmm.
that is a PVC pipe. It is a um, white material, often white material. It is soft. It melts very easily. It's really cheap, and you can make PVC models reasonably easy, and they actually can make them in the US. Reaper does a lot of them, like the new Bones line is PVC.
Okay.
But yeah, there you go, PVC. It's soft, and the tooling cost is similar to plastics, which I'll talk about in a second. But you end up with like these soft, sort of cheap feeling models that bend in temperature,
Mm-hmm.
they don't
I know
have
exactly what
much
you mean. Yeah.
structure. Yeah. And
Yeah.
to me, I felt like, and also there's a detail issue too. They're actually a little less detailed. They're
Yeah.
getting better at it, but anyway, I looked at that and I said, this isn't quite my speed. I don't really want to do this. So I looked at plastics. The tooling cost for a plastics is very high. Very, very, very high. Super expensive. You need a plastic injection mold company. You need to build special tooling that often they can't do it themselves. They do it overseas. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
they can, sometimes they can't. But it's like, let's throw a number out there, right? Let's say it's $20,000 to $30,000 a model per mold. Okay.
Okay.
My game has 26 units, and that's 50% of what I want to make.
Right.
I think people can do a quick math of, let's say, 25 times 30.
Right.
I'm a human being who's not wealthy, rich. I was not born in any money. I don't have I don't have massive zeros in my bank account. Kickstarter sure as heck didn't give me massive zeros. So plastics is not on the table, right? And that's great. It is going down in cost. It is becoming easier, and it is U.S. manufacturers are opening themselves up to this thing. That may not always be the case because there have been developments. Things have changed. But
Mm-hmm.
when I was doing this, could feel bad unless I wanted to buy my own plastic injection machine, rent a shop, learn to do my own tooling, and basically then if I'm making miniatures and I'm not making windshield wiper components and selling those wholesale, am I really doing the right thing? Like,
That's
just
great.
a question. Just a question.
So you ended up with the fourth option.
Resin. And let me tell you why, the brief rundown of why resin gets a bad rap. So, resin, chemically speaking, is just like a plastic that you get off the sprue, right? It's chemically very similar.
Mm-hmm.
It is more difficult to get right. There's so much more doing it by feel with resin for a lot of manufacturers, where they're just kind of winging it. Like, they're trying to get it done. Another downside with this, for fine cast, for example, is you have this range of old models that were previously made in metal, and rather than making a new resin mold, speculation, but I believe it to be true, they were taking a metal mold and they added new channels and stuff for it, and then we're pouring resin into those metal molds, which is why they looked weird and they were covered in flash.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's what was happening, because they're double dipping a little, right?
Right. Right.
Which makes sense for a low yield model.
Yeah, I don't think people appreciate for a company like Games Workshop that when they pull things out of production, it's because it's very hard to make money on a particular kit. It's
Yeah.
not like they make a lot of money. GW is doing fine for themselves, but
Oh,
at a
yes.
particular SKU level, it is very difficult, especially as the community, copies their things more and more. So they're designing
Right.
a thing and getting even less of the money back from making it. But
Yeah.
there's a lot that goes into this. So
Oh, yeah.
in the interest of time,
Yeah, yeah. I was trying not to be super long-winded, but I really like this part of it. So
no, this part's cool. So your resin is not what people are expecting from Games Workshop. What is your resin like?
well, there's two factors there. Is our resin is, for all intents and purposes, for the purposes of like gluing. Well, hold on. Let me be clear on that. For the purposes of slicing, chopping, drilling, it is indistinguishable from a GW plastic.
Okay.
So we got the texture that was used and the density and everything perfect.
Okay.
There's two factors which are negative, and they're just intrinsic to the system that I'm using. Factor number one is we do not use a dry release mold reagent. The reason why you don't have to wash a fine cast model is because they use a dry release mold agent. It just is what it is. We don't have that. They have that. You can get away. You do have to still wash Forge World,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't have to wash fine cast. We don't have the dry release agent. It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
The second piece of that is you can't use plastic glue on resin.
Right.
It just doesn't do anything.
It doesn't work.
You have to use super glue, and some people don't like that, yourself included, et cetera, right?
Well, if I wasn't a clumsy fool, I wouldn't care. But I ruined a pair of glasses with super glue.
Oh, wow.
Because I was shaking it to get the gel out, and I had the cap off, and the glue went all over my face, in my eyes, and on my glasses. And I had to make a quick decision about whether my eyes or my glasses were more important.
And
so
your
I rushed.
were less important.
It's true. So I rushed to the bathroom and washed my eyes out, and by the time I got back to my glasses, they were done.
Oh, man.
So
I'm sorry to hear that, Colin.
No, that's all right. It was all right. I needed new glasses anyways. There was a lot of put glasses in the freezer for 20 minutes, take glasses out, use an alcohol wipe on glasses, put glasses back in the freezer. There was a lot of that for a day to try to resolve it. Anyways, we're well over time. So
sure.
So I think that this is great. Where can they find out about Outward Realms?
Yeah. Outwardrealms.com.
Okay. What if they wanted to hear from you in podcast format?
If they went to the expanded tree of the best in tabletop network, we have a podcast, the Outward Realms podcast. It comes out every 2 weeks.
And it will also be on our YouTube now.
Yeah,
because
that's
people aren't spotting it in the feed. So we'll get it.
Okay.
Get it up there. But yeah, so that's been just great. Michael's part of the network. Outward Realms is the game. Outwardrealms.com. Now, Michael, you're going to stick around for part 2.
I sure am.
I believe you have some entertaining stories about repairing projectors.
I do.
And at least one story does involve an explosion, yes?
It does.
It does. Okay. Yeah. I want to hear about that. If you want to hear about that as well, then you should stick around for part 2. For right now, we're going to put that up where everybody can get it on YouTube. I will warn you, though, in the next few weeks, we're going to enter a premium subscribers area, and part 2 of this show, including this episode with Michael, will go behind that subscriber wall. I just want to have the network be able to grow faster, and so we need to do that. But for now, I want to thank Michael Timpe. I got it wrong on the podcast for like a year and a half before he corrected me. Let's just be clear. Michael is way too polite to correct you if you get it wrong. I asked him directly, and he said, "No, you've been saying it wrong for a year and a half." That was Michael's answer to that. So thank you so much, Michael. Outward Realms. I think there's probably enough story that you should come back and tell more another time. Maybe we'll get questions about the process for next time, and we can riff on audience questions. That'd be great. But for right now, I'm Colin. This is the story I wanted to talk about, and it was great fun. We'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.